I want to begin by asking you something genuinely. Not rhetorically, actually genuinely. Can you name any other cultural event in South Africa that has attracted this specific combination of responses? I'm talking parliamentary committee scrutiny, government departmental investigation pressure, a premier calling for children to be blacklisted from national teams, a literal cabinet minister calling organizers nostalgists for a historical wrongdoing, a national media investigating framing it as a revival of something we buried 30 years ago. Because I have been thinking about this entire week, and I just cannot find the equivalent example from any other cultural community in South Africa. I've thought about it, I've researched about it. There is no cultural event that received this much backlash than Bokkieweek. The Zulu Reed Dance is a culturally specific event. I keep going back to that one because it's the most well-known, one of the most well-known cultural events in South Africa. It is not open to all South Africans equally. It has specific cultural and religious dimensions that make it accessible only to those within that tradition. You get what I'm saying? Nobody is calling for a parliamentary investigation into its inclusivity. Traditional initiation schools in the Eastern Cape are culturally specific as well. They are not integrated events. Young men from outside those communities do not attend. Nobody is demanding that the Department of Basic Education investigate which schools allow their learners to participate as if they're looking for a serial predator. Cape Malay cultural festivals in Cape Town are community specific too, because they have roots too in a specific historical and religious tradition that shapes who participates in it and how. That's why you'll never see a Xhosa person in a Cape Malay event. They don't have those roots. They don't know what's going on. African professional associations exist across multiple sectors, from law to medicine to engineering, specifically to serve Black professionals and to advance their community interests within their respective fields. These organizations are not open to all South Africans on equal terms, and nobody demands that they should be. So why on earth does Bokkieweek, a bunch of Afrikaner children playing rugby, attract what none of these other events attract? That is the honest question, and it deserves an honest answer rather than a political one. And because I'm not a politician, I'm going to give you the unfiltered answer. I want to give you both the part of the honest answer that is uncomfortable for Bokkieweek and the part that is uncomfortable for its critics, because I think South Africans do deserve both of worlds rather than just the version that confirms whatever they have already believed. The first part of the honest answer is that Bokkieweek does have a historic specific context that makes it easier to frame it as some sort of a problematic event than the other events I mentioned earlier. Why? Well, you see, Bokkieweek's founding figures had explicit views opposing racial integration in sport during the transition period. Basically, they were pro-apartheid. The late Dan Nolte, one of the founders, was a Conservative Party MP whose whole political views were clearly documented and clearly positioned against the democratic transition that South Africa was undergoing at that time. And it's not even me saying that. He would say it openly. The administrative choice to use apartheid-era province names as team identifiers, names like Transvaal and Natal, rather than Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, is a choice. And if you want an innocent explanation, why don't you ask them instead of assuming they are apartheid nostalgists? Those province names were not just administrative designations, right? I understand they carried political meaning in the apartheid system, and choosing to continue using them in 2026 is a decision that reasonable people can legitimately criticize. But then again, those province names did not make apartheid. The people who made those province names made apartheid. It's like how you associate a child with the father. Are you really being fair? These are real things to be brought up. They are not invented by News24, and they are documented historical facts that deserve to be acknowledged honestly rather than dismissed. But here's the second part of the answer that Panyaza Lesufi and Mckenzie and the parliamentary committee chair are not engaging with, and that they refuse to see. There is a meaningful legal and constitutional difference between criticizing specific choices made by an event's organizers and mobilizing government departments to investigate the event's existence while calling for child participants to be blacklisted, potentially killing their dreams. from national sports selection. The first approach is legitimate public discourse. The second approach is the use of state power against a cultural community's expression of its identity. And Section 30 and Section 31 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa are unambiguous about this. Every person has the right to use the language and to participate in the cultural life of their choice. Every single person watching this video belonging to a cultural, religious, or linguistic community may not be denied the right to enjoy their culture, to practice their religion, and to use their language. Afrikaner cultural identity and the Afrikaans language are explicitly protected cultural communities under those provisions in the same document that protects every other cultural identity in this country. The argument that is now being made by Panyaza Lesufi and the Parliamentary Committee Chair essentially comes down to this. Bokkieweek's cultural character is exclusionary, and therefore the state is entitled to investigate and potentially restrict it. But apply that same standard consistently, and you have a very significant problem, don't you think? Let me explain. The Zulu reed dance excludes non-Zulu participants by its own cultural and religious logic. Traditional initiation schools in the Eastern Cape exclude girls and non-Xhosa participants by definition. The South African Jewish Board of Deputies serves a specific religious and ethnic community. The Cape Malay Choir Board exists specifically to preserve a specific cultural tradition. Are any of these organizations and events now subject to serious parliamentary investigation for their inclusivity? If they are not, and they are not, then the question of why Bokkieweek becomes a very uncomfortable one about whether all South African cultural communities are genuinely treated equally under the law or whether some are more equal than others. Shout out to George Orwell. What I want to see happen, and this is my honest position, is engagement rather than investigation. Organizations like Bokkieweek exist in the same South African constitutional space as every other cultural community. If there are specific elements of how the event is run that constitute hate speech or active racial discrimination that can be proven in court with proper evidence and not just yibber yabber, those legal mechanisms exist and should be used. But the idea that a government department should investigate a community sports event of children playing rugby for its cultural character, that children who attended and didn't have a choice because their parents said they should attend should be barred from national teams, that organizers should be publicly labeled nostalgists by a cabinet minister of sports, these responses are not proportionate to what the evidence shows this event actually is. And the unequal application of this standard, this specific scrutiny applied to this specific community and not to culturally specific events in other communities, is something that South Africans who care about constitutional consistency across communities should be willing to say loudly, regardless of which community is on the receiving end. Because here is the thing that I think gets lost in this debate time and time again. Even some content creators don't bring it up. The Constitution does not protect only popular culture. It does not protect the only cultures of majorities. It does not only protect culture that everyone agrees is comfortable or progressive or properly transformed. It protects the cultural rights of minorities specifically because majorities can protect themselves through democratic processes. Minority cultural rights and constitutional protection precisely because the majority can outvote them. And if we are genuinely committed to non-racialism as a founding principle of this democracy, then non-racialism means the equal protection of all racial and cultural communities, not the protection of some communities from discrimination while applying a different standard to others.